Gravity Falls doesn't need much of an introduction at this point. It's one of the most influential cartoons of the 2010s, and definitely one of the highest acclaim. When twin 12-year-olds Dipper and Mabel Pines travel to their great-uncle Stan's tourist trap for the summer, they find themselves in the quirky little town of Gravity Falls, full of deep secrets and even deeper mysteries. The show had lovable characters, great humor, and it pushed the envelope of what you were allowed to get away with on a children's cartoon. Some of the episodes get downright disturbing. It came out at just the right time too, with the advent of social media. It was a mystery show that came out right alongside the development of the internet's cartoon community, and as such, there was tons of fan discussion, from reviews to theories. Anyone who wanted content while they waited for the show to come back and resolve the latest cliffhanger would not go hungry. Of course, as we all know by now, fandom can be a double-edged sword, and with love and praise comes criticism, sometimes fair and sometimes not. This is Mabel Pines, the older of the twins by 5 minutes. She is the more hyperactive one, with an energy that's hard to tame. She's very optimistic, sometimes even to the point of denial. Nothing can dampen her positive outlook on life, except clay puppets. She loves her brother, her friends, and her pet pig Waddles that she manages to win an affair during the show's run. Some people might call her stupid, but a better word is impulsive. She frequently acts on emotion, as opposed to Dipper acting on logic and reason, and being right in the middle of her Boyz Crazy phase means that this tends to get her into a lot of trouble. Behind the scenes, Mabel and Dipper's dynamic were inspired by the creator Alex Hirsch, and his relationship with his own twin sister. To sum up Mabel's personality as simply as I can, when the two of them were offered any free item in the Mystery Shack, Dipper went with a practical hat, and Mabel went with the grappling hook that probably shouldn't have been sold there to begin with. This is the kind of character that's almost destined to be the most popular, and for a while, she was. But as the show went on, something happened. There seemed to be a break in the facade.
I ignore personal space. I'll stand too close to your face. I hope we never part.
And as the show came to a close with its 3-part finale, Weirdmaggedon, something changed entirely. Mabel's reputation in hindsight is quite a different ballgame altogether.
Marvel as the writers take the best character and gradually make her the worst character by having her learn no lessons for 40 episodes.
The show itself literally states that Mabel is like a saint. Or at least Wendy does.
How is that even possible? Mabel's a straight-up saint, you judgmental hoofbag.
But the fandom's opinion on her tended to grow darker. We'd get words like self-centered, self-absorbed, only thinking of herself, careless, and among all of them, selfish. Honestly, I don't think that I've ever seen a character's public opinion sour so much. I mean, as quickly as it did. Patrick Star took like a decade to get how evil some people think that Mabel is. It got to the point where Alex Hirsch created supplementary material in order to partially address some of the harsh criticism that Mabel had gotten over the years. In the Don't Dimension It segment in the graphic novel Lost Legends, Mabel is forced to contend with every conceivable alternate universe version of herself. Yes, this came out before Spider-Verse. She's forced to quote-unquote deal with herself. All of the other Mabels are too distracted to actually deal with the problem at hand. And she comes across Anti-Mabel, the most evil Mabel in all of the multiverse, who forces her to confront her own quote-unquote selfishness.
You think you've defeated me, but I'm a part of you! Every selfish choice you make, that's being just like me! What do you have to say to that?
It's, really easy to tell when a writer is talking to the audience and not a character. I don't want to say it's all doom and gloom. Some people still really do love Mabel like the good old days. But some people do have an intense loathing for the character, to the point of blaming her for ruining Dipper's life, sabotaging his relationship with Wendy, emotionally blackmailing him to stop his apprenticeship with Ford, and generally leaving a wave of destruction in her wake. And the question we're going to ask today is, how fair is this criticism? Like with Panini, I think there's a few things that we have to establish before we can determine how much we should be judging Mabel. I'll be talking about things that both detractors and supporters of Mabel use. I'll also be talking a lot about Dipper in this video too, because it's important to how Mabel's actions should be perceived. For starters, Mabel and Dipper are both 12 years old going on 13, and between the two of them, Mabel is the one who acts her age, while Dipper tries to act older and more mature. Keyword being tries. A lot of people do call Mabel incredibly immature, and while she can be, it's not out of the realms of normality for her age. She is the one who acts closer to her age than Dipper does. It's an incredibly easy thing to forget when you're watching cartoons, that kids be kids, because they're always saving the world or whatever, but it's never a non-presence, or at the very least, it shouldn't be. Dipper and Mabel are both young, still learning things, and are going to make mistakes. It's all a part of growing up. Making a mistake in and of itself isn't what we should be judging. It's the after effects, and what the kids try and do in order to fix their mistakes that will be counted. That being said, just because things work out in the end doesn't mean that Mabel will be assumed right. Although it doesn't look like it sometimes, this is still a Disney cartoon, and they do specialize in happily ever afters. One thing that I've noticed is that no matter what the circumstances, the ending usually does work in Mabel's favor, whether or not it should work in her favor. The most infamous example is Love God, which we'll be talking about in detail later, where Mabel is the only cartoon character in history who uses a love potion and it actually works out for the better. We all agree that's not how that plot is supposed to work, right? Whether or not the love potion actually worked the way that she wanted it to, it doesn't change the morality of what she actually did. Thirdly, Dipper and Mabel are siblings. And like any sibling duo, they're going to bicker a lot. And we could go back and forth on who started it or who gets more digs on who, but like, if I'm gonna be talking about every instance where Mabel jokingly calls Dipper a creep in the past, or makes fun of him for not being manly, we'd be here all day and this video would go nowhere. Dipper engages in plenty of this stuff himself. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes not so much. I'll only be talking about quote-unquote serious situations that have lasting consequences, or should have lasting consequences. See my last point about that. So we won't be talking about, say, Carpet Diem or Little Dipper. And finally, let's keep in mind what kind of show Gravity Falls is. It's a children's Disney cartoon, and it is a comedy supernatural mystery. This isn't a dig. See the last video for that. I'm just stating this so we know what we're dealing with here. The show involves characters learning lesson. You know, Disney. So once again, the characters are going to make mistakes. Also, being supernatural means what is real or what is not real is within the show's control, entirely. The show needs to establish something as dangerous for me to consider it dangerous. That being said, there is something important that we have to talk about before we truly begin, and that would be destroying Dipper's hopes and dreams. Okay, so how a lot of you feel about Mabel probably lies on one of two things: Dipper's crush on Wendy, or Dipper's apprenticeship with Ford. A lot of the story pits what Mabel wants in the moment against Dipper wanting one of those two things. Let's talk about the Wendy thing first because it comes up more often. Dipper has a crush on Wendy. Dipper is 12, going on 13, and Wendy is well into 15. Dipper's motivation for most of Season 1 is to do something to impress her or her friends. Word of God says that this crush was never meant to work out. Dipper and Wendy have exaggerated height differences for their age groups for this reason. And as of Into the Bunker, Wendy outright states that she's too old for Dipper. As per fate, it was doomed to fail, and it certainly wouldn't be healthy for either of them. When Wendy turns 18, Dipper will be 15, going on 16. Cartoon or not, that's pretty bad. Now, I have to be a little bit harsh to the show. Besides the differences in design and age, Season 1 of Gravity Falls did everything between Dipper and Wendy right if the idea was for them to get together in the end. In almost every single episode for a time, appeasing Wendy is Dipper's main motivation beyond the journals and the background mystery of Gravity Falls. If it was always doomed to fail, it kind of feels empty and hollow in hindsight. Like, I get that a lot of the arc is about Dipper learning that this is not the right path and making mistakes, but at a certain point it does become repetitive. The precocious crush is a very hard trope to do, and it's something I'm sure we'll be talking about again in this series. For every good example like Lisa's Substitute, there are a million other versions of this that get very awkward. Not that it gets awkward here, it just gets repetitive. Like, the question has to be asked. If Dipper crushing on Wendy was doomed to fail, why is this Dipper's motivation in The Inconveniencing, Double Dipper, The Time Traveler's Pig, Summerween, The Deep End, and Into the Bunker? That's 6 episodes by Into the Bunker where it officially ends. And that's just the 22nd episode of the show, barely beyond halfway. The Inconveniencing is the 5th episode, where this really starts. So, within the span of 17 episodes, it happens 6 times, or more than 1/3 of the episodes. And this is just where it's a major plot motivation, not minor moments or blips in other episodes. And it's made even worse due to the inclusion of Robbie. We're supposed to like Dipper and we're supposed to root for Dipper. And the show, more or less, makes Dipper and Robbie romantic competitors. And while Dipper x Wendy is definitely unhealthy and bad, Robbie isn't a good option for Wendy either. I mean, I'll say it plainly. Robbie is a fucking asshole. Fight Fighters is about him threatening to beat up a 12-year-old. and the show does largely imply that without Dipper's influence, the two of them get together, at least for a time. Pretending for a second that Dipper and Wendy were the same age, how do you think the story usually goes? It's the Mario versus Bowser dynamic, in plain text. I'm not saying that Alex Hirsch was lying about this always being doomed to fail, and I'm definitely not saying that Wendy and Dipper should have gotten together in the end. Definitely not. I'm just saying that I can understand why people ship the two, because that's what the writing does tend to communicate. And also, in Season 1, Dipper should have probably had his other motivations pushed more forward. Mabel herself is the one that repeatedly tries to tell Dipper that this is the wrong path for him, one way or another, but I don't think that's good enough. Mabel is in her Boyz Crazy phase, chasing everyone that she can, and it's repeatedly shown that she's not the matchmaking expert that she really thinks she is. Being as fair as I can, Dipper trying to win Wendy's affections does help him build their more platonic friendship, so there is a point to it in the end. I just think that it's not the most ideal of directions, and I can see why people did get the wrong idea with the route that was taken. Now, let's talk Ford. In Dipper and Mabel vs. the Future, Ford offers Dipper a chance to be his apprentice and save the world and learn all about the supernatural. Everything that Dipper's always dreamed about. This devastates Mabel, who is terrified of growing up and going through high school alone. This is a large impetus of why she gives the rip to Bill, who tricks her as Blendin, which is what allows him to unleash Weirdmaggedon on Gravity Falls. Throughout the finale, Dipper comes and tells Mabel that he doesn't want to be Ford's apprentice anymore, and that convinces her to leave the temptation bubble that is Mabelland. Like above, I can see why people see this as an example of Mabel-centered morality. Once again, being overly harsh of the show. Part 2 of the finale probably has the worst pacing of the whole thing. We never see Dipper come to this conclusion himself, and it does kind of come out of nowhere, that he's giving up on what appears to be his hopes and dreams. There's also never any revelation that Mabel is the one who accidentally let this happen. Like, no one else ever figures out that she is the one that made the deal that allowed Bill to create Weirdmaggedon. Everyone just assumes that she's so pure that she could never even conceive of handing over the rift, tricked or not. And that's never gonna make a character look good. I think the show communicates some parallels. Possibly unintentionally, possibly not. Mabel does have a worry that she and Dipper might end up like Stan and Ford. As kids, they were best of friends, but as bitter old adults, they resent each other. This all started because Stan accidentally broke Ford's perpetual motion machine that changed the course of his life, stated to be for the worse. Stan didn't mean to do this. Mabel also makes a mistake, letting Bill cause Weirdmaggedon, and the only way to resolve that issue was for Dipper to simultaneously give up his hopes and dreams. Intentional or not, stated or not, there are parallels. However, let's talk about the reality of Dipper's hopes and dreams here. Most obviously, Ford is fucking crazy!
I haven't been in this dimension for a while. It's okay to give children weapons, right?
Okay, that's a bit harsh, but like, he's not a good role model or a guardian is what I'm saying. The show does make that very clear with Stan, but like, Ford is showing Dipper a magical multi-dimensional dice for no reason that ends up causing a ton of trouble. He takes Dipper into an alien spaceship without telling him about the security system, and just expects him to YOLO magnetically down a metal beam. Hey Ford, I know you've been away for a while, my dude, but since then, we invented this cool new thing called a rope. Honestly, he could be just as impulsive as Mabel is. Ford has his own problems that the show definitely showcases he needs to work through. But you know, kids show, where they eat danger for breakfast. The apprenticeship would be unhealthy and bad for Dipper for other reasons too. Ford tends to alienate people. Not just Stan, but also McGucket. And Ford ends up projecting a lot of this onto Dipper and Mabel's relationship. He literally asks if never being apart from Mabel is quote-unquote suffocating in one of his worst moments, because he's seeing the conflict with him and Stan, which Mabel and Dipper do not have at this time. Ford believes that Mabel is holding Dipper back, which she's not doing. And Ford knows Mabel oh so well at this point that he just straight up assumes that she'll be fine without Dipper. Alternatively, it's clear that Dipper does need Mabel just as much as she needs him. He admits just as much in Weirdmaggedon, and it's true. Dipper wouldn't have been able to beat Bill in either situation without Mabel. The offer Ford is giving Dipper is to skip high school to work with a man who has been in another dimension since the 1980s, and doesn't have the fullest grasp on our own reality. And in the grand scheme of things, while Ford pushes Dipper into the apprenticeship now, It's not like Dipper helping him out after high school is off the table forever. Like, what would happen if Dipper goes through high school and then asks to learn for Ford? Is he gonna say no? Because I think I've made people very mad, I do believe that I should put a disclaimer here. I love Gravity Falls. I wouldn't be making this video if I didn't. I went way far and above and beyond watching every single episode for this video instead of just going off memory. And I also went through several supplementary materials. I still think Gravity Falls holds up as one of the top 10 shows of the 2010s. I am being a boring, hyper-critical thing, and this stuff, none of it actually matters when I'm doing a casual viewing of the show. I'm just not afraid to criticize the stuff that I love. And I can see those rather tiny problems in the grand scheme of things next to all the amazing things that the show has done. So why was it important for me to bring any of that stuff up? Because some of Mabel's most contentious appearances are when Dipper's crush on Wendy gets involved. The first one being the Time Traveler's Pig. In this episode, it's the fair, and Dipper tries to impress Wendy. This backfires horrendously. Dipper ends up giving her a shiner, and she gets comforted by Robbie. Meanwhile, Mabel tries and succeeds at winning Waddles the pig. However, this isn't how fate has to be. A time traveler is looking for anomalies in the area, and the two kids are able to take his tape measure. Then it's Groundhog Day, where Dipper tries again and again and again to make this work. It goes poorly again and again and again. You just can't fight fate. Or can you? There's one singular universe where everything is able to go right. Unfortunately, it causes Mabel to lose out on Waddles. Fate works in such a way that only one of the twins can win here. A lot of people call out Mabel for guilt-tripping this episode, the start of a pattern of behavior, in a sense creating emotional blackmail in order to manipulate Dipper. And in this case, it's the most forced and ridiculous usage of that argument. This episode, more than any other of the contentious examples, goes out of its way to show that Mabel is not emotionally blackmailing Dipper. He at first thinks that she is, but then he keeps going forward in time, seeing that her emotional distress is rather genuine. And it makes sense for Mabel to feel so strongly because while Dipper was trying to win Wendy's affection, Mabel repeatedly won Waddles and continued to build a relationship. Ignoring the fact that the crush was doomed to fail, Dipper is still the one in the wrong here. He's the one who wanted to steal the time-traveling tape measure to change the course of fate, which is something that ended up ruining Blendin's life, sort of. Not to mention that if Mabel didn't win Waddles, then Pacifica would. It's never actually mentioned what she was planning on doing with him, but let's be honest, we all know that she was going to eat the pig. Even in spite of this, when all is said and done, Mabel thanks Dipper for his, sacrifice, and even helps trip Robbie up with Waddles' help in the end. If you're actually paying attention, this episode does make Mabel look a lot better than a lot of the haters decry. This is a point for Mabel. The Deep End is the other major Wendy-focused episode that's brought up against Mabel. Dipper gets a job working at a pool to spend time with Wendy. Meanwhile, Mabel finds out that there's a merman in the pool. She repeatedly takes and uses pool equipment in order to save him. This ends up requiring a megaphone, so Mermando can finally find his family. This is one of those specific episodes I was thinking of when I came up with point number 2. At the end of this episode, Dipper gets fired due to Mabel's actions, but Wendy also gets fired due to her own actions. So, no harm, no foul. Dipper doesn't actually lose anything. However, for the sake of argument, let's remove Wendy getting fired herself from the equation. Because the question of morality, how selfish Mabel is or isn't, shouldn't entirely be focused on the consequences, but intention. You're not a good person if you keep trying to poison the water supply, but you only end up killing all of the bacteria and curing dysentery, even if the Disney Corporation says otherwise. So, Mabel is trying to help a fish guy find his lost family. Like, she might be doing it because she's crushing on him, but there's no doubt that she's in the moral right here. Especially opposed to Dipper working to spend time with Wendy on the job. By raw intention, Mabel is clearly in the right. However, this is an episode where her impulsiveness does muck up things a bit. Not once, at any point, does she ask Dipper for help. You know, the guy who has a job working at the pool. Like, at the end of the episode, Mabel is driving away in a golf cart with a stolen cooler. And that's all Dipper knows! That his sister broke into the pool and stole a cooler for no reason. Dipper even calls her out on this when it's revealed.
Hola. Whoa! Way to bury the lead, Mabel.
There's also this one moment.
Blackmail.
I know I said I'd try not to talk about the sibling bickering stuff, but that one's a little bit far, Mabel. Also, time and place. But other than that one joke, I'd say Mabel gets another good person point. But she also gets a reckless point. Because she really should have talked to Dipper at some point. A lot of people point to this episode as Mabel getting everything she wants in the name of love. She gets her first kiss in this episode, but if she was truly a bad person, she didn't have to help Mermando get home. She could have kept him forever and ever. like she does in Boyz Crazy. In this one, there's not really any defense for what Mabel does. She and her friends save the boy band several times from an evil producer man, and as the episode goes on, the only difference in their lives is that their cage is now a little bit nicer. She does let them go in the end, but up until then, everyone is telling her that this is wrong, and they really shouldn't have to. Mabel, you should know this. You let Mermando go. That's a bad cookie for you. The Love God is the other episode that's heavily used to bash Mabel, because it is wholeheartedly the biggest example of Mabel-centered morality in the entire show, where whether she does right or wrong, things just do seem to work out for her. It's a love potion episode, and Mabel, being the wannabe matchmaker, gives some potion to Tambry and Robbie to help Robbie get over Wendy. Like, the love potion is never supposed to be a good thing, right? In any other cartoon, or even back into like fables and fantasy, the message is always, love potion bad, or you can't force love. The one exception is the Gravity Falls episode, The Love God. At first, it does seem like it's going to go about the traditional path. Mabel gives the love potion, and the friend group breaks apart. Because at the age of 12, Mabel doesn't understand the more subtle nuances and rules of dating, just thinking of raw, superficial compatibility. So she tries to use an anti-love potion, but before she's able to, this crush thing all works out in the end. Let's be as fair as possible here. Mabel is trying to help someone out, even if that person is Robbie. But it's made very clear that it's kind of about her own happiness. She can't be happy if someone else is upset. It comes across more that she wants to complete the bomber's notebook. It's about proving that she's a good matchmaker and not about anyone else's happiness. Even barring that, forcing other people to fall in love is never going to be a good look, unless you are literally a cherub. And this episode proves that Mabel is anything but. You could argue that it's just impulsiveness here, what Mabel does, but a lot of this comes from thinking that she knows better than she does. So I have to call her actions in this episode selfish, which is another bad cookie. Of course, we have to give Mabel her easy wins too. The Last Mabelcorn is the episode that literally calls Mabel a saint. She goes after unicorn hair to protect the shack, believing she is pure of heart. But Rainbow Sparkle here is quick to correct her, and Mabel freaks out. So she goes on to commit 1,000 good deeds. Sure, she wanted to see the unicorn for the sake of seeing a unicorn, and she was doing good deeds to get something out of it, but that's being very pedantic and hypercritical. Quote-unquote, proving you're a good person is always going to be a paradox when you can't count good actions that come from when you're trying to get something out of them. Mabel goes through a lot in this episode, and she should get her dues for it. Good point. The other super easy win for Mabel is definitely sock opera. Throughout Season 1, Dipper does have a lot of sacrifices for Mabel's happiness, one way or another. And this episode looks to be no exception to that, when Dipper is trying to hack into a computer and needs Mabel's help. But Mabel is focused on yet another guy and trying to create a giant sock puppet rock opera. This is the episode that infamously calls Mabel out on her quote-unquote selfish behavior, or rather, has Bill do it, in an attempt to manipulate a sleep-deprived Dipper. Let's really talk about what Dipper is trying to do in this episode. What he quote-unquote needs Mabel's help with. Dipper is trying to break into a laptop because it has information on the mysteries of Gravity Falls. And he is so obsessed with breaking into it that he becomes sleep-deprived. He even gets a cryptography book that should probably be burned, because its one and only piece of advice is telling him how many 8-letter words there are. So he spends days trying to brute force his way into the laptop. If you're wondering, this is literally the worst, most inefficient way of hacking, and never works unless you have supplementary information about the device's owner, or you're a machine that can implement thousands of attempts a second. Dipper needs Mabel to type in the codes as he reads. With or without Mabel, this would have never worked. And it's not time sensitive until it is. Mabel literally says that the laptop can wait, and she's not wrong. Mabel even agrees to help when she's done with her endeavor. It's Dipper who can't wait. Because Dipper is sleep-deprived and is about to lose the laptop completely, he makes a deal with Bill. This leads to Mabel needing to sacrifice her rock opera, no longer impressing this boy, in order to save Bill. And she makes that sacrifice, despite Bill trying to manipulate her. It's clearly her best moral appearance throughout the entire show, and she'll get another good point for that. On my rewatch of the whole series for this video, one episode that did catch my eye was Into the Bunker, and not in Mabel's favor. In this episode, they're exploring one of Ford's old bunkers. Meanwhile, Dipper is struggling to tell Wendy that he has a crush on her. I want to tell you the specific order of events. They all go into the bunker, and then they nearly get killed by the security system. Like, it's really close, they almost die. Upon escaping this, Mabel learns what Dipper is trying to do, tell Wendy how he feels. Mabel encourages him to tell her. And when Dipper refuses, Mabel pushes Wendy and Dipper into a room. And she has literally no idea what's on the other side. It'd be bad enough if they didn't just survive a death trap, but the fact that they just did makes it one of Mabel's most stupid and reckless actions in the entire show. It's not even speculation on my part, as it does put Dipper and Wendy into actual severe danger, where they nearly get eaten by the shape-changing monster. And what's the point of this? To get Dipper to admit that he has a crush on Wendy? Like, it's good for the plot to get them to move on from this, but like, is right now really the best time? Even if the bunker wasn't full of death traps and space aliens. Mabel was trying to help here, I guess, but she does it in literally the worst way possible. So that's another reckless point. So with the major arguments covered, our score is 4 good points, 2 selfish points, and 2 reckless points. But we're not done. Now is the lightning round. Quick episodes we don't have to talk about in depth, but should at least be considered. In The Hand That Rocks the Mabel, she isn't able to say no to Gideon at first, and that gets Dipper's life in danger when he offers to say no for her. But Mabel does quickly learn her lesson, and she ends up saving her brother's life. Considering that she had no reason to suspect that Dipper would end up in actual danger, she gets a good point. In The Golf War, sure, Mabel cheats at mini-golf, getting the help of the Lilliputians, but when things do go too far, Mabel does end up saving Pacifica's life. That's a good point. Bottomless Pit is a series of short stories where the characters are falling down a hole, and they tell stories Treehouse of Horror style. It's technically non-canon, but it is relevant to the discussion due to technicality, because at the end, the third story is revealed to have actually been the catalyst for everyone falling into the hole. And in the third story, Mabel wants Stan to always tell the truth, so she uses these magic dentures to make him always tell the truth. That's reckless, especially with how much she should know about Stan and his business. In Blendin's game, Mabel and Dipper fix Blendin's life, try to give Soos a good birthday, and give him a time wish in the end. That's 3 good points, 1 for each action. In Irrational Treasure, Mabel resists the temptation to tell Pacifica that her family is a fraud, which is worth half a point since she doesn't stop Dipper from doing it. And to round it off, I'll give the other half good point for Soos and the real girl. Mabel tries to help Soos get girls. It doesn't work, but not because of Mabel's efforts, it's because Soos misinterprets her instructions. In Dungeons, Dungeons, and More Dungeons, Mabel and Stan give up watching the newest episode of their favorite show in order to save Dipper and Ford from Weird Al. That's a good point. And finally, in The Stanchurian Candidate, she and Dipper use a mind-controlling tie in order to help Stan win the election and stop Bud Gleeful from becoming mayor and pardoning Gideon's actions. It's trying to do the right thing by doing an immoral action. Mind control is wrong, kids! And while things might have seemed desperate, there was probably other things that they could have done. They also ended up mind-controlling Soos at the end when they couldn't control Stan any longer, which, I mean, I love Soos, but really, he was your selection to be Gravity Falls mayor. What were you two gonna do when he won? Mabel commits these actions with Dipper, but it's still another bad cookie. So here's the general points. How she is with her general behavior throughout the entire series. She does do some immoral stuff, but any kid does immoral stuff on occasion. Yes, she is selfish some of the time, but I think her biggest character flaw is how reckless she can be. She does things without thinking, and that causes trouble a lot of the time. The saving grace is that she does these reckless things out of a desire to do good. Selfish isn't the word that I use to describe Mabel, almost ever. Impulsive is the word that I'd use. She's never malicious, beyond light teasing in something like Little Dipper or Carpet Diem, and she does want to improve the lives of those around her, almost always. However, this can backfire when she doesn't think things through, which happens quite a lot. Not telling Dipper about Mermando, pushing Wendy and Dipper into the bunker room, using a love potion. She's never trying to hurt anyone, she's just laser focused on one specific thing. And when she does screw up, she usually does apologize or thank the people who helped her. Usually, mind you. Not every single time. The show does forget to call her out on things sometimes, the bunker being the biggest example. With that being said though, let's talk about Mabel's biggest moral dilemmas in the entire show. When questioning Mabel's morality, one episode that comes up is Not What He Seems. Mabel is presented with the biggest choice in the entire series. Stan is stealing hazardous government waste. He has a ton of fake IDs. He clearly knows a lot more than he's letting on, and is a cause of the gravitational anomalies that have been happening. And there is no time to explain things any deeper. This is on top of his generally more shady behavior of conning just about everyone he meets. Mabel, being the one next to the button, means that she's the one who's forced to choose. Stop the machine, or don't. She could either place her trust in her twin that she's known her entire life, or this man she found out could be a fraud, not knowing his intentions with this machine that could have the power to destroy the entire world. She does trust Stan in the end, and this allows Ford to escape into the multiverse and return to Earth, after 30 years of being lost. So, the question to be asked, in that moment, knowing what Mabel knew, did she do the right thing? Because, even in canon, this act leads to a lot of things. This machine does lead to Ford returning, which is a good thing. This also allows Stan to avoid being apprehended by the government, which we'll also call a good thing. However, the machine creates a rift. The same rift that Bill Cipher uses to create Weirdmaggedon. The whole portal was Bill's idea, and he'd been waiting for such a long time for someone as smart as Ford to create such a portal. Without the portal or the rift, Bill would essentially be returning to square one. He does have influence and makes deals with others, like Gideon most notably, but none of them had the capabilities that Bill needed to return. The closest other character to filling those shoes was McGucket, and he made himself go insane. Bill would likely enter our realm at some point no matter what, but it's unlikely that it would be any time during the characters' lives if Mabel did press that button and they dismantled the portal. The portal is dangerous, and that's something that Ford is quick to remind Stan when he gets through in the end. Of course, Mabel doesn't know that. What does she know? She doesn't know what the portal will do exactly, just that it's dangerous. Also, the consequences of not pushing the button to her would be the government taking away this guy she no longer knows, and stopping these gravitational anomalies. The entire episode is a crisis of faith for Mabel. Evidence keeps piling up against Stan more and more, and throughout it all, Mabel tries to justify the fake IDs, the hazardous waste, the car crash that apparently took Stan's life, and by the end, she's just not able to. Stan only has barely enough time for one final plea to convince her to not press a button and stop a machine that she believes might destroy the world.
Remember this morning when I said I wanted to tell you guys something? Wanted to say that you're gonna hear some bad things about me. Some of them are true, but trust me, everything I've worked for, everything I care about, it's all for this family.
And that works. Dipper tells her to think with her head, but she doesn't. Mabel thinks with her heart, and instead, she doesn't push the button. And in the end, that kind of unwavering trust in a person, in spite of all evidence due to that kind of love, I have to call that a good action. Because, on one hand, she didn't know Stan at this point, but on another hand, she did. This wasn't blindly following a person. It was believing there was good in another in spite of all evidence against that. I wouldn't even call the action reckless. On Mabel's part at least. It was probably one of the hardest thinks that she's ever had to do. What Stan did was certainly reckless, but that's not Mabel's fault. Of course, even good actions can have negative consequences, and we have to talk about the consequence of this choice. In Dipper and Mabel vs. the Future, Mabel comes face to face with the horror of growing up and her endless summer finally coming to an end. Her friends are going away and it looks like Dipper is going to be off to be Ford's apprentice. She's going to be alone during her high school years, which she believes will be absolutely hell. She's so upset that she leaves the mystery shack and accidentally takes Dipper's bag with the rift in it. And this has always been used as the biggest sticking point against Mabel. Bill, disguised as Blendin, offers to let her summer last as long as she wants it to, in return for the rift. This is what allows Bill to create Weirdmaggedon. This has been described as Mabel causing the apocalypse for some more summer fun times, which is inaccurate. Against Mabel here. The rift isn't hers to give. She doesn't know what it really is, and she doesn't even know why Blendin wants it really. And at some point, even a 12-year-old should know that something that sounds too good to be true is too good to be true. And a little bit of logic can tell you that it's unlikely for Blendin to risk his career again after what happened. On the flip side, Bill is in total disguise here. Blendin is someone that Mabel presumably knows and has presumably helped in the past. Mabel is also in heavy emotional distress. Compare this to when Dipper made a deal with Bill. He was sleep deprived, he was under intense pressure, and Bill wasn't in disguise at all. Not to mention, Mabel didn't know what the rift was because Ford didn't trust her enough to tell her about it and explicitly told Dipper not to tell her. It might be hard to believe, but some people think that this one action makes Mabel horribly unlikable and completely irredeemable. And I just don't see it, since almost every other character had been tricked by Bill at this point. It's super understandable that Mabel would get her turn. However, I have to note, there is something very strange here. Mabel is never caught. It is never addressed until supplementary materials. And by Weirdmaggedon Part 2, Even Mabel isn't making the connection that the rift caused her summertime prison. It also doesn't help that before they get into Mabelland, everyone is assuming that Mabel had nothing to do with anything. I'm usually against things being too tropey, but without the moment of everyone finding out what Mabel did, it feels like a piece of the episode is missing. Especially because Bill would totally call Mabel out on this, if for no other reason than to get everyone else to gang up on her and break the circle. I want to say that in the canon 40 episodes, she doesn't get consequences for this deal, but Weirdmaggedon and nearly getting killed, Bill was going to choose her. Those are certainly consequences. I want to say that Mabel never apologizes, but she does help save the world. It's not the same thing as having a scene where someone calls Mabel out for this, but as fair as I can, what Mabel goes through is not nothing. It's not like Mabel screwed the world and sat on her ass while everyone else did all of the heavy lifting. Weirdmaggedon Part 2 is the other big thing against Mabel. She's in a bubble of pure temptation designed to keep her trapped there forever, so the circle against Bill can never be completed. And for a while, it looks like she's going to stay there and forget all about humanity, even replacing her brother with Dippy Fresh. A lot of people point this out as to why Mabel is so selfish and awful. And I have to ask, you guys know that the bubble is like a spell, right? Mabel has been trapped in that bubble for about 3 days when she's found. Everyone else was in there for only a few minutes or an hour at the most, before they started getting picked off by one distraction after another. The bubble almost got Dipper too, but unlike Mabel, he was able to recognize when something was too good to be true. It was a strong trap that wasn't easy to break out of. But I do get that when you state it plainly, this looks really bad for Mabel. Mabel does make the deal that screws over the world, willingly or not. And then Dipper is the one who needs to appeal to her and sacrifice what he wants to bring her to rationality. Like, there's no way around that. This is what happens. All the while, Mabel is never directly called out on her mistake, never even discovered in her mistake, and never on-screen guilty about the damage that she wrought. It's more of a pacing problem than a Mabel problem, really. The finale is over an hour long already. It says 3 parts, but it's technically 4 parts since part 3 is double length, and it uses just about every second that it has to wrap up a very densely packed show, stuffing it to the brim. And honestly, in some regards, even that wasn't enough. For another example, the force field that kept Bill trapped in Gravity Falls is never explained in the episode. I can't say that the finale needed a 4th part, since it is great in spite of my many criticisms. But with not having that discussion with Mabel realizing what she did and apologizing, Dipper not having a better through line to not wanting to be Ford's apprentice, the finale could have used a 4th part, or a 5th if you want to count Dipper and Mabel versus the future. The real sinner here is Roadside Attraction, which doesn't need to exist and makes Dipper look like the unlikable jerk of the family. The finale, with how it is in the end, I think hurt Mabel a lot more than she hurt anyone else in the finale. Like, we can focus on the deal that she made under false pretenses, and we can focus on part 2 of it, but Mabel was also in part 3, trying to help save the world. And she and Dipper were doing a great job at going toe-to-toe with Bill, the most powerful being in the multiverse. It's clear that whether or not Mabel took the blame, she definitely took responsibility. Going through all of the evidence in all of the episodes, I think that most of the criticism towards Mabel is unwarranted. One of the most insane fandom statements I have heard is that Mabel learns no lessons at all the way through, which is objectively untrue. Like, for example, you can't make summer last forever, and trying to prevent the inevitable leads to bad things happening. In Sock Opera, she does learn that Dipper makes a lot of sacrifices for her. In The Hand That Rocks the Mabel, she learns to say no to guys that she doesn't like herself. In Boyz Crazy, she learns not to kidnap people. Opinion did turn on Mabel with the finale. I think that's an objective fact, because of her behavior in Weirdmaggedon Part 2, and being the impetus of what transpired. It is a bad look without taking the time to address exactly what happened, and I'm sure if there's one regret from the writers, it would be not nipping this in the bud. Then again, maybe it wouldn't have helped. Sock Opera and Don't Dimension It both exist for pretty much this same reason, to show that Mabel is not a self-centered person. To call Mabel selfish or evil for what happened in the finale is wrong. She was tricked and manipulated and needs to be brought out of it. Mabel is a 12-year-old girl who is going through emotional turmoil. And after all of that, she was able to be pulled out of Mabelland, and she did help save the world. I'm not going to say that the finale is the best look for Mabel, but it's not the worst either. and I don't think that it should define what people think of her character either way. Dipper has also had bad appearances too, but the long and short of my opinion over him isn't how he acted in Summerween, when, he was reluctant to help save everyone's lives by stooping to the indignity of trick-or-treating, and then he lost the candy due to his carelessness, nearly dooming everyone. No character in the show is perfect, except Soos, obviously. Soos is always right, and he likes Mabel, so that has to count for something. Verdict here, I think that people are way too harsh on Mabel. I can understand if people don't like her high energy. Those kind of characters can be hard to tolerate for some people, but some people go way above and beyond with their hatred. Which is even sadder when it comes to how certain segments of the fandom try to interpret Jiffany. Yes, I'm sure that you can change her. I know how that story turns out. In my opinion, there is only one thing that Mabel has ever done that is truly unforgivable.
Hey, fingerless gloves look awesome!
No, they don't.
They do work, and I will not hear blasphemy against that fact. 0 out of 10, worst character ever. Seriously though, Mabel is alright outside of very isolated incidents. Read The Lost Legends sometime. And if you like this video about Mabel, and the last one about Panini, I'm thinking of making this a regular installment. So if there's a controversial character that you'd like me to go on about and evaluate, leave their names in the comment section below. I'll probably be doing Princess Bubblegum at some point, since I have to watch Adventure Time anyway, but that won't be for a while.